"Did you like the new house?" Grandpa asked, his voice echoing through the Christmas dinner air. I froze. The fork in my hand slipped, clattering against the plate, sending a tremor of tension rippling through the room. It was as if, in that single moment, the entire world had paused, like the air itself held its breath. Even the steam rising from the green bean casserole seemed to hesitate. I glanced up. Grandpa Walt's eyes were locked on mine, his smile a little too wide, a little too knowing. And yet, there was an edge to it, a kind of self-assuredness that sent an icy shiver up my spine. "What new house?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, as though the words themselves might crack under the weight of what was happening. There was a brief moment of stillness. Dad, seated beside me, suddenly coughed into his napkin, and Mom, her hands trembling slightly, reached for her glass of water, but missed it entirely. Her gaze flitted nervously around the table, avoiding Grandpa's. It was almost as though they were all holding their breath, waiting for someone to speak. But Grandpa, oblivious or perhaps pretending not to notice, just kept smiling. "The one on Briar Court," Grandpa replied with the kind of confidence that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "The basement smells like chlorine, but you can fix that." Chlorine basement. I felt my pulse quicken. I knew exactly which house he was talking about. The Hart House. The same one that had been in the news for weeks, flashing police sirens, missing person flyers still stapled to the stop signs, people whispering about strange noises at night. The same house that made the whole neighborhood nervous. The kind of house you didn't want to look at too long because it felt like there were eyes staring back from behind the curtains. And now Grandpa was mentioning it like it was just another one of his many offhand comments. I didn't know what was worse, the fact that he knew about the house or the fact that he was talking about it so casually. My phone buzzed, and I fumbled to grab it, my fingers a little too shaky. The screen flashed, lighting up the darkened table with a cold, artificial glow. "Welcome to Ring. Your device is online. Front door, Briar Court." The words didn't make sense at first. Device? Online? Briar Court? What was going on? Blinked, staring at the notification. My heart skipped. I hadn't bought a house, at least I didn't think I had. My thumb hovered over the screen for a second before I tapped the notification open. The front door camera feed appeared in full color. There it was, the house, standing eerily still, bathed in the pale light of the street lamp outside. And then, I saw it, motion detected. I wasn't sure if I was breathing anymore. Is this some kind of joke? I muttered, my voice shaking. Mom's hand squeezed mine under the table, tight and insistent. Her face was pale, but she didn't look at me. She didn't dare. "We were going to tell you after dessert," she said. Her words rushed almost. Desperate. Grandpa didn't seem bothered at all by the tension that had crept into the room. He just tapped his fork against the edge of his china plate, the rhythmic sound adding an odd kind of tempo to the unsettling silence. He was still smiling, but this time there was a tightness in his expression that I hadn't seen before. "You'll love the storm shelter," he said, his eyes twinkling with a strange kind of pride. "I put that in 40 years ago." Still, tight. A storm shelter? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had to ask. "You built that house?" I blurted, my voice rising slightly, trying to wrap my mind around the implications of what he was saying. Grandpa nodded slowly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. He didn't seem concerned by my shock. In fact, he looked almost pleased. "Yep," he said with a soft chuckle, tapping his fork again. "Built it from the ground up. Always loved working with my hands. That basement? It's something special. Tight, secure, no one gets in without my permission." My stomach twisted. His words didn't make sense, not the way he was saying them. Not with the way the house had been left to rot, covered in police tape, rumors swirling around it. It wasn't just a house. It was a place people were afraid of. And now Grandpa was acting like he had a connection to it that he was proud of. Something was wrong. Dad cleared his throat again, louder this time, and shifted uncomfortably in his seat. He didn't meet anyone's eyes. "There were HOA complications, legal stuff. But it's a good investment," he said, his voice lacking conviction, the words coming out like they were rehearsed. "It's got potential, you'll see. Once you get in, it's great." A cold wave of realization washed over me. "HOA complications," I repeated, my voice low. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. My phone buzzed again. Another notification. This time it wasn't just a message. Ding, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the room, jolting me into full awareness. Police activity, Briar Court, welfare check. Grandpa's smile faded just a fraction. It was almost imperceptible, but I saw it, the slight twitch of his lips. He shifted in his seat, no longer the proud patriarch, but something else, something cold. "We should go now," he said, his voice low, almost a growl. I wasn't sure if he was talking to me or the rest of the table, but I knew one thing. I had to get out of that house. I didn't know what was happening, but something was off. The way Grandpa was acting, the way Dad was avoiding eye contact, it all felt like a bad dream I couldn't wake up from. "Why?" I asked, my voice shaky but determined. "What's going on? Why the sudden urgency?" Grandpa leaned across the table. His eyes darkened now, his voice barely a whisper. "Because whatever's alive down there just turned on your lights." I sat back in my chair, the words sinking into my chest like stones. The room felt colder. The Christmas lights blinked overhead, casting an eerie glow over the table, making shadows dance in the corners. My phone buzzed again, pulling me back into the present. I stared at the screen, unable to tear my eyes away from the feed. A hand. Gloved. Wet, pressed against the lens. The thumbnail was small, but the message it carried was anything but subtle. Something was down there, something that wasn't supposed to be, and it had just turned on the lights in a house that no one was supposed to be inside. My breath caught in my throat as the realization hit me. Whatever was hiding in that house wasn't just a mystery. It was a secret, a deadly one. Grandpa tapped the edge of his plate, the sound sharp in the stillness of the room. "Time's ticking," he said, his voice flat. "We go now, or you'll regret it." The room fell silent. Again. The weight of the moment hung heavy in the air, and I couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Cliffhanger. A new alert flashed on my phone screen. Motion detected. Basement. The thumbnail was a blur, but the hand was unmistakable, wet, gloved, a promise that I wasn't ready to keep. The night had settled over Briar Court, casting long shadows across the suburban streets. The neighborhood, usually full of cheerful lights and the hum of family life, now felt like a ghost town. There was a chill in the air that seemed to seep into your bones. Briar Court twisted like a snake behind the church nativity scene, its quiet demeanor belying the dark history buried within. Wreaths hung on the mailboxes, candy canes adorned the porches. Everything looked perfectly festive, like something out of a Christmas card. But the illusion was shattered the moment we reached the end of the cul-de-sac. The Hart House loomed ahead, untouched by time, but eerily empty. The front door was still decorated with the same wreath that had been there for years. The bow, though, wasn't the typical red we were used to seeing. It was orange, the kind of orange you associate with county notices. Condemned. The tape had been ripped, the word condemned barely legible. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the growing pit in my stomach. The house that had once been a symbol of suburban perfection had turned into something darker, something none of us had bargained for. Marla Pierce, the president of the HOA, emerged from the shadows like a figure straight out of a crime thriller. She wore heels that clicked sharply on the pavement, and a parka that seemed far too formal for the occasion. In her hands, a clipboard. It was as if she was armed, ready to pounce at any moment. "Evening," she said, her voice slick and practiced. "Pierce, Maple Ridge HOA, you can't be here." Dad didn't hesitate. He flipped open the folder in his hand, holding it out for her to see. "We own it. Deed recorded today," he said firmly, his voice a little too steady. Marla's eyes darted from Dad to me, her gaze calculating. A faint smirk tugged at the corner of her lips. "Correction," she said coolly. "She owns it." Her eyes lingered on me, cold and predatory. My stomach lurched. I stared at her, confused and stunned. "Why is the ring in my name?" I asked, barely able to speak. My hands were shaking, and the world around me felt like it was spinning. Mom's voice cut through the tension, too fast, too rehearsed. Liability, shielding, normal for a trust. She said it like I should have known, like it was just another piece of boring paperwork we had to go through. Normal, I snapped, my voice rising. On the house where Avery Hart vanished. Marla's expression flickered for a split second, but it was gone in an instant. Grandpa stepped forward, a glint of something in his eyes. He jiggled a key that looked older than the house itself and grinned. "Basement first," he said, as though he were about to show us a hidden treasure. Marla stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Storm shelter is HOA property by bylaw. Safety inspection pending," she said, her voice dripping with authority. Grandpa's laugh was a rasp, low and menacing. "I built it before your bylaws existed." A patrol cruiser rolled slowly past, its lights off, barely noticeable in the shadows. The officer inside didn't get out. He just watched us, his eyes hidden behind the dark glass. It felt like we were being watched from every angle. I could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on my chest. Marla lowered her voice, leaning in close enough that I could smell the faintest trace of perfume. "Open that door, and you void indemnity. Anything inside becomes your problem." I couldn't breathe. My problem. Before I could react, Grandpa moved, pushing past Marla with a force that surprised even me. He reached for the basement door, his fingers brushing against the cold steel. The door creaked open and a gust of cold air hit us, making my skin crawl. The unmistakable smell of pine cleaner mixed with the scent of something else, pool chemicals, flooded my senses. It was the smell of something that had been left to sit for too long, something that had been forgotten. We descended the carpeted stairs, the sound of our footsteps muffled by the thick layers of dust that covered the floor. The house felt cold, not just temperature-wise, but in a way that made every fiber of my being scream that something was wrong. At the bottom of the stairs, we stood in front of a steel door with a wheel handle. The door was padlocked, but the marks around the lock were fresh, scrape marks like someone had been trying to force their way inside. On the wall next to the door, almost erased but still visible, was something that stopped me cold. "Do not." "Let him in." The words were scratched into the paint, hastily done, as though whoever had written them had been desperate. The message was clear, but what did it mean? And who was he? Grandpa pressed his ear to the door, listening for something on the other side. He knocked once, the sound hollow in the stillness of the basement. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, from the other side, there was a faint response, a soft tapping. My heart skipped a beat. I could feel the blood drain from my face. There was something on the other side of that door. Mom spun toward Dad, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. "Tell her now," she demanded, her voice sharp. "Or I will." Dad's jaw clenched. He swallowed hard before speaking, his voice trembling despite his efforts to sound calm. "The HOA seized this house over fines," he admitted, the words slipping out like a confession. "We bought it at auction and in her name, to protect the family." Before he could finish, there was a boom from upstairs. Something heavy had slammed against the door. Footsteps followed, fast and panicked. A woman's voice, muffled but desperate, called out from the other side of the steel door, "If you open this, you'll kill me." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. My breath caught in my throat. Who was she? Why was she locked behind that door? And why was she so afraid? Marla's face twisted into something cold, calculating. She glanced at the officer outside, then back at Grandpa. "Back away," she whispered harshly, her hand twitching near the master key on her belt. "You don't want to open that door. It's not just your problem now." But Grandpa's hand was already on the key, the old brass turning with a sickening click. He shoved the key into the lock, ignoring Marla's warnings. The door creaked again, louder this time, the sound of metal scraping against metal, as though it was protesting the intrusion. Grandpa's grin didn't falter for a second. He didn't care about her warnings about the officer outside. He cared only about what lay behind that door. "Time's ticking," he muttered. "Let's see what we find." I stood frozen in place, every muscle in my body telling me to run, but I couldn't move. I had to know. The woman's voice, the tapping, the door. What was hidden behind it? Grandpa twisted the handle, the lock clicking open with a hollow finality. The door groaned as it swung wide, and a rush of cold air filled the basement. I stepped forward, past Marla, past Dad, and into the darkness. Every instinct screamed at me to stop, but I kept walking. What had we gotten ourselves into? Cliffhanger. The basement lights flickered to life. The room was empty. But then, a soft click echoed from somewhere deep inside the room. A security camera hidden in the corner powered up, and a red light blinked twice, then steadied. A new alert flashed on my phone. Motion detected. Basement. The last image on the screen was chilling. A single gloved hand reached out from the shadows. The door slammed behind us. The sound of the lock snapping open echoed through the air, a sharp crack that made my heart race. Grandpa's hands trembled slightly as he spun the wheel of the steel door, the metal groaning under the strain, as if it had been waiting for this moment for years. The air in the basement felt thick with dust and secrets, heavy with something ancient. When the door finally creaked open, it revealed a small concrete room. The walls were grimy, stained in places with something that looked like old water damage, and the ceiling was low, almost oppressive, making the space feel even smaller than it already was. There were no windows, nothing to break the claustrophobic silence. The room was just there, still, empty. The smell of bleach hit me immediately, sharp and chemical, mixing with the musty air. My eyes scanned the room, and my stomach twisted. In the far corner, there were 2 cots, old and worn, their thin blankets piled high as though someone had been lying there not long ago. Next to the cot, a small workbench was scattered with tools, some of them rusty, others with faint rings of bleach on them, like someone had tried to clean up something that couldn't quite be scrubbed away. A phone blinked on the floor. A single missed call flashing on the screen. 911 disconnected. The words felt like a punch to the gut. I felt a chill roll down my spine. It was as if someone had been here recently, someone who had needed help and was now gone. My fingers shook as I reached down to pick it up, but I didn't dare unlock it. I didn't want to know whose desperate call had been cut off by whatever had happened in this place. But it was the scribbled words above the cot that stopped me in my tracks. The handwriting was childish, jagged, as though written in a panic. Christmas rules. Be quiet, be small, don't breathe when he's near. My heart skipped. Those words, those rules, they looked far too familiar. My chest iced over as the realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. I had seen these before, hadn't I? As a child. But why? Why was I remembering this now? I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The room felt like it was spinning around me, and all I could do was stare at the words, feeling as though I had been here before, feeling as though my whole life was unraveling in front of me. Then, a whisper. From the shadows broke the silence. "Close it," a voice pleaded, shaky and terrified. "Please close the door." My eyes snapped to the corner of the room where a figure huddled beneath a faded blanket, trembling. A girl, late teens maybe, wrapped tightly in the thin, worn fabric. She looked like she hadn't seen sunlight in days. "Avery?" I asked, my voice catching in my throat. She shook her head quickly, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm Jenna," she whispered. Her voice was small, fragile. I found something in the crawl space. Someone else's clothes, photos. I called 911, but then they told me to wait down here to stay hidden until help came. The door locked. I've been down here for hours." Her words hit me like a wave of ice water. This wasn't just some isolated tragedy. This was part of something much bigger, something that I couldn't quite understand yet. Who was she? Why was she here? And why did it feel like I knew her, like I was connected to all of this somehow? Jenna's eyes flicked nervously between my parents and Grandpa, as if weighing whether or not to trust us. He came back. He said, "It was safer if I didn't scream," she added, her voice barely a whisper. I felt the blood drain from my face. Who was she talking about? He? Who was this he who was keeping her locked away down here, and why? The questions swirled in my mind, each one darker than the last. Marla, who had been watching us from the doorway, finally spoke, her voice cold and detached. "This is a violation of HOA protocols," she said, her hand reaching for the door handle. "This is illegal." Grandpa's snarl was low, guttural. Of your revenue stream? He spat the words with venom. Tell her where the fines went. Marla hesitated, the tension between us palpable, but she wasn't prepared for what came next. Jenna stepped forward shaking, but she clutched something in her hands, something that looked like a ledger. She held it up, her voice shaking but firm. HOA penalties, late fees, transfers to Cedar Ridge Holdings, LLC, she said, flipping open the pages of the ledger. The names, the addresses, everything seemed perfectly neat, calculated, but it wasn't the neatness that struck me. It was the destination of the money, the silent beneficiary. Jenna flipped to the last page, her fingers trembling. The words on the page sent a jolt through my chest. Beneficial owners, my parents and me. My name printed like a stain, bold and undeniable. I felt the room tilt beneath me. The walls seemed to close in. Everything I thought I knew about my life, about my family, suddenly felt like it was slipping through my fingers. I turned to Mom, desperate for an explanation, but her eyes were cast down, avoiding mine. Mom crowded close, her hands shaking. We did it to protect you, she said quickly, her words tumbling out in a rush. If anything went wrong, it's in your trust, not... She trailed off, her voice growing quieter. Not you. Not you? I repeated, the words like a punch to my gut. What does that mean, Mom? Grandpa moved past us, opening a floor hatch in the center of the room. The chemical sting of chlorine was stronger now, burning my sinuses. The hatch opened with a loud squeak, and beneath it was another door, a second layer of secrecy that I hadn't expected. It was bigger than the room above, a hidden space that looked like it had been untouched for years. Grandpa's grin was all teeth as he motioned for us to follow. Storm shelter, he said, his voice strangely reverent, and something the bylaws never saw. The air around us seemed to grow colder, charged with something dark and dangerous. We climbed down the narrow stairs, the faint hum of electricity buzzing in the background, as though something was alive down here, watching us. The corridor stretched ahead, the walls lined with cables that hung from hooks like twisted veins, leading us deeper into the unknown. We reached a metal cabinet at the end of the hallway, and Grandpa opened it with a satisfied grunt. Inside the cabinet was a large master switch, its label stark and ominous, Sentry. Grandpa didn't hesitate. He pulled it. Immediately, every wall in the room lit up, revealing rows upon rows of TV feeds. Every screen flickered to life, each showing a different house on Maple Ridge. Living rooms, nurseries, bedrooms, every inch of every home on the street was on display. Except to my horror, one of the screens showed my own face. My childhood bedroom was visible, clear as day, the camera angled at the old bookshelf by my bed. And then, on that same screen, a little girl appeared, me in footy pajamas, staring up at the camera, her face eerily calm. I'll be quiet, Grandpa. I promise, she whispered. My heart stopped. The past wasn't just a collection of memories. It was being watched. Everything had been watched. We were never alone. Don't look, Mom said sharply, grabbing my shoulders, trying to pull me away from the screen. But it was too late. The truth was already out there. The cameras had been watching for far longer than I ever realized. Cliffhanger. The cruiser outside finally flared to life, its lights casting an ominous glow through the windows. The sound of doors slamming and boots pounding on the porch reached our ears, and a voice echoed from the yard, loud and demanding, "Police search warrant!" And in that moment everything stopped. The game had changed. The sound of boots pounding against the stairs grew louder, and in seconds the basement door flew open, revealing a swarm of police officers. Flashlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating the cold concrete walls. They moved like a well-oiled machine, guns drawn, issuing sharp commands. Marla, standing in the doorway, immediately raised her hands in the air, a fake smile plastered on her face, the kind that tried too hard to appear innocent. "Officer, thank God," she said in a syrupy voice. "I called. These are trespassers." She pointed at us, her finger shaking with practiced indignation. The officer paused for a moment, his gaze moving from Marla to the chaotic scene in front of him. His flashlight danced across the walls, landing on the rows of monitors and the massive cabinet in the corner. Then his eyes locked onto mine. He didn't seem fazed. "What am I looking at?" he asked, his tone flat, as if this wasn't the first strange thing he'd seen today. Grandpa, still standing near the controls, wiped his mouth with the back of his hand and spoke up, his voice dripping with a mix of mockery and truth. "What happens when an HOA forgets it's not a government?" He didn't care that the police were now in the room. He was beyond that point, beyond everything. Marla's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered, trying to regain control of the situation. "Those feeds are voluntarily integrated for safety," she said, her voice smooth like honey, though the quiver of doubt in her words betrayed her. "Neighborhood watch. It's standard procedure." The officer seemed to consider her words for a moment, but then his radio crackled, pulling his attention. He keyed the mic. "We got a 911 callback on a Jenna Morales. Says she's trapped in the basement of—" He paused and looked at Jenna, still huddled in the corner, trembling. "You, Jenna?" She nodded slowly, her face blotchy and streaked with tears. Her voice came out as a broken whisper. "They locked me down here. They wouldn't let me out." The officer turned to Mom, who had been standing quietly by my side, clutching the edge of my sleeve. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a thin line as she tried to keep her composure. But now, under the pressure of the moment, it all seemed to crumble. "No," Mom said quickly, stepping forward, her voice rising. "No, she wasn't locked up. She was hiding. We heard a break-in. We called 911 to get help." Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out, her fingers trembling. The screen lit up with an incoming notification, and she looked at it, her face draining of color. "Outgoing 911, 4:12 p.m. The time on the playback was unmistakable, and in the background of the call, I could hear her voice, my mother's, her voice frayed and anxious, pleading with the dispatcher. "My daughter is in danger. Send everyone. We need help." Everyone's eyes turned toward me. The room seemed to shrink as the word "daughter" echoed in my mind. My breath caught in my chest. My heart pounded painfully in my ears. Everything stopped for just a moment, as if the world had paused and was holding its breath, waiting for the next step. "Tell me," I said, my voice hoarse, though it felt like I was barely able to form the words. "Tell me now, Mom. What is happening? What is all of this?" For a long, painful beat, she didn't answer. Her eyes fluttered closed, her face strained. When she opened them again, they were different. New, a strange, unfamiliar weight hung behind them. "You're not our biological child," she whispered, her voice barely audible, as though she had been holding the words back for years. "We took you when you were 3, to protect you from him." She gasped, as if the admission itself had stolen the air from her lungs. Grandpa lifted his hands, palms out in a gesture of mock innocence. "They're lying," he said, his voice almost gentle, but the edge of something darker simmered beneath it. "You don't know the whole truth." Mom's eyes flicked to Grandpa, and I could see the conflict flash in her gaze. "Your birth name is Avery Greer," she continued, her voice stronger now, more sure. "This is your house." The room felt like it was collapsing in on itself. My knees buckled slightly, and I grabbed onto the nearest table to steady myself. The papers that had been shoved in Dad's folder fluttered as his hand shook. The ledger. The child's handwriting above the cot was mine. The name on the papers was mine. Avery Greer. The world spun, and for a moment I thought I might faint. My chest tightened painfully, the breath stolen from my lungs. I looked at Dad, desperately searching for answers. Dad's face was pale and his hands trembled as he pulled out a deed from the folder. He held it up, shaking. "We kept the Hart name to confuse him," he explained, his voice faltering. "We changed the records, erased your real name. We bought this place to end it, to put it in your name so he could never sell it again. He could never take it back from us. From you." I shook my head in disbelief. "End what?" My voice cracked, a weak, almost desperate whisper. Grandpa stepped forward then, his expression hardening, his tone dropping to something low and foreboding. "The game we played every Christmas," he said softly, his voice thick with nostalgia. "You hid. I found you. That was the rule. It always was." The officer looked at us with growing confusion, but his attention was diverted by the sound of his radio crackling once more. "We need backup. We need CPS. We need everyone," the officer muttered, his voice distant as he spoke into the mic. His eyes flicked nervously from one person to the next, as though he was trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't make sense. Marla, who had been standing quietly by the door, moved with a sense of urgency, her fingers hovering near the master switch on the wall. She took one step forward, her voice sharp and threatening. "If those feeds go public," she said, her eyes gleaming with calculated fear, "every house sues. The HOA dies. Property values crater. You'll ruin everything." "Good. I snapped, my voice tight with barely contained fury. Let them all see what's been going on here." I looked at her with contempt. "You've kept us all in the dark for too long." Jenna, who had been silently watching us, tugged at my sleeve. Her grip was tight, desperate. "There's one more door," she said urgently. "One more door. Avery, please." At the end of the corridor I saw it. A low hatch bolted shut, its color the same as the walls, blending in so perfectly that I almost missed it. But the words on it were unmistakable. "Open last." I looked at Grandpa, my heart pounding in my chest. He smiled at me, a small, knowing smile, as though he had been waiting for this moment all along. He reached up and slid a tiny brass key from his watch band. "You were always brave, Avery," he said, his voice low and full of something I couldn't name. "Let's see how brave you are now." The key clicked into the lock, and the air seemed to shift in that moment, as if the room itself was holding its breath. Cliffhanger. The hatch door creaked open. A dark, suffocating space lay beyond. Something was waiting for us there. Something that was meant to stay hidden. Something that would change everything. I took a deep breath. The truth was finally within reach. But was I ready to face it? The key turned with a noise that reverberated deep in my bones, a sound so sharp it felt like it came from inside my very chest. The hatch dropped open, and cold air rushed out like an ocean, filling the basement with a bite that cut straight through to my skin. I stood frozen for a moment, staring at the darkness beyond, unsure of what lay in the depths, uncertain of how much further down this nightmare could go. Inside, shelves, neat, organized. Too neat for something that had been abandoned. The shelves were stacked with binders, each one labeled with wrapping paper tags. Christmas age 3, Christmas age 4, Christmas age 5. All the way through to Christmas age 22. I reached for the first binder, my fingers trembling as I pulled it from the shelf. The binder felt cold, its edges sharp as if it had been waiting here for me, locked away. I opened it slowly, each page flipping with a crisp snap, like the sound of a confession. There they were, photos, Polaroids, me, tiny, barely more than a baby, asleep in a concrete room. A plastic wreath hung in the corner, bright and festive, yet out of place in the bleakness of the room. The pictures felt wrong, evidence bags, a curl of hair, a teething ring with AG scratched into the plastic. The weight of it crashed over me. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My chest felt hollow. These weren't just pictures, they were pieces of a story I hadn't been told, a story I hadn't even known I needed to know. I forced myself to flip to the next binder. This one wasn't about photos. It was filled with paperwork, HOA minutes, votes pushed through in the dead of night, emergency bylaws written in the margins. A few pages were marked with bold red ink, outlining penalties for late fees. But the most unsettling part was what came next. Cedar Ridge Holdings, LLC. The name glared back at me. There were transfers, thousands of dollars being siphoned from fines to purchase abandoned homes at a fraction of their value. The pages blurred as I scanned them. Homes sold for 10% of their worth, properties acquired under the guise of legal procedures, but the names on the deeds were always the same. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was part of this. My name had been part of this deal. Somehow I had been part of this twisted web of corruption. I dropped the binder back onto the shelf, my hands slick with sweat, and grabbed the third one. This one was thinner, simpler, almost too straightforward. Paternity test. A single piece of paper slipped out, its edges dog-eared and worn. The numbers on it burned into my eyes. Walt Pierce, 99, 98%. Grandpa wasn't my grandfather. He was my father. The words seemed to echo in my head, over and over, until I thought I might be swallowed whole by them. My legs forgot how to work. I stumbled back, my vision spinning and the room tilted sideways. I barely caught myself before crashing to the ground. My head was spinning, my breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps as the truth slammed into me. The truth that had been buried under lies, under stories told over Christmas dinners, under the thick layers of normalcy I had grown up with. Mom caught me just in time, her hands firm on my shoulders, pulling me upright. "We stole you out of that house to save you," she said, her voice cracking. The words were like glass shattering in my chest. "We ran every Christmas, moved you from place to place, kept you hidden. He found us anyway. He always did." I looked at her, but the face in front of me wasn't the mother I had known. She was a stranger, a woman who had spent years hiding the truth, who had made impossible decisions in the name of safety, of love. But it had all been a lie. Grandpa, no, my father, leaned against the doorframe, his smile twisted into something dark, almost proud. "You always found your way back," he said, his voice soft as if explaining a child's behavior. "Just like good property." The words stung, the implications suffocating. I wasn't a daughter to him. I was an asset. An investment, something to be hidden, protected, but ultimately owned. I wanted to scream, to tear the walls down around me, but all I could do was stand there, shaking, the weight of it all pressing down like a vice around my chest. The officer, who had been silent until now, raised his weapon, his voice steady. As he commanded, "Hands where I can see them." Everything happened in a blur. Marla lunged for the console, her fingers frantic as she reached for the switch. Her face was wild, desperate, like a woman losing control of a world she had built from lies. The lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. Then the emergency lights came on, flashing red in a strobe of chaotic color. Sirens began to wail outside, a storm of sound building and swelling. The whole world seemed to be collapsing, in on itself. In the red glow of the emergency lights, Grandpa spoke again, his voice low but commanding, aimed directly at me, as if I were the only one in the room. "Choose, Avery," he said, his tone thick with finality. "Press upload all and burn the neighborhood to the ground. Your neighbors, your friends. Lawsuits that will last a decade. Or close this door, keep the money, and the trust makes you a millionaire before New Year's. You were always so good at being quiet." My eyes flicked to the console in front of me. There it was, a blinking button that seemed to pulse with power, with the weight of 1,000,000 consequences. The screen flashed with the words, "Upload all feeds to public county records," and next to it a folder labeled "Deed Rightful Owner, Avery Greer." My thumb hovered over the button. The choice was mine. All of it, every secret, every betrayal, was laid out before me. And it was up to me to decide whether to expose the truth to the world, to rip apart the lives of everyone involved, or to close this door and walk away with everything I had been promised. The money, the control, the power. I looked at Mom, the woman who had stolen me to save me, who had lied to protect me, and at Dad, the man who had laundered crimes to keep us safe. Both of them had spent their lives keeping me hidden, but now the truth was out. There was nowhere left to run. I turned my gaze to Jenna, still shaking but resolute, her eyes locked onto mine. She didn't look away. She had been through hell, but she hadn't flinched. She was brave. She was the only one who hadn't tried to shield me from the truth. I looked back at Grandpa, the man who had claimed to love me, who had kept me locked away in this twisted game for years. He was finally exposed, and for the first time he looked small. His power was slipping away. I took a deep breath, and in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I pressed upload. The screens flared to life, bleeding their secrets into the world. Phones lit up in every window on the street. The quiet suburb was awakened, jolted from its slumber. People screamed, shouting as they saw their lives exposed for what they were. The veil was ripped off. There were no more lies, no more games. Marla's. Composure shattered completely. She lunged for the switch again, but this time the officer tackled her to the ground, his weight pinning her down. She struggled, but she was no match for the truth now. Grandpa didn't move. He just stared at me, his gaze filled with a quiet, cold fury as if I had betrayed him. But I hadn't. I had freed myself. I had broken the chains. Upstairs, I could hear the choir from the church singing Silent Night. The sound filled the house with an eerie, sacred quality, as if it were marking the end of an era. Below ground, the console chimed, "Deed transfer complete, Avery Greer." The house, my house, finally recognized me. The past snapped into place like a lock obeying the right hand. I turned to Mom and Dad, the weight of the moment still heavy. In my chest, the officer stepped forward and, with a cold, businesslike tone, said, "You're under arrest." Mom nodded, resigned. "We'll testify. Every name, every bylaw, all of it." I looked at Grandpa, no, my father, the man who had tried to control me, to own me, to keep me in his twisted game. I said the last line of the rules I had written on a wall I didn't even remember. "Be quiet." For the first time in his life he was. The officer led him up the stairs and I followed, feeling the weight of the past heavy on my shoulders. But when we reached the top, a soft chime rang out from the console behind me. I glanced back and my heart stopped. Motion detected. Storm shelter. Heart residence number 2. Another feed. Another house. Another door that said "Open last." And somewhere, hidden in the dark, another secret was waiting to be uncovered.